Welcome back to the channel. Thank y'all for hanging with me on this Saturday. Oh man, that's fun. Man, that's fun. There we go. I am covering some water. Man, that fish is either pre-spawn or it's one that spawned like super early in February. Bass Trick Swimbait. That's a beautiful fish. I mean, not giant, probably three and a quarter pounds. Man, that fish kind of looks pre-spawn. I mean, looks beautiful. Or it's one that spawned in February and had a bite the cast before that. Or it's one that spawned super early, but you never know. Just covering a lot of water. You know, May can be a really fun time to fish. It can be a confusing time, and it can feel like feast or famine because you don't really have one definite depth to be in. You don't really have one technique going on. And everything plays. And the 2-foot depth zone spawning fish thing is sometimes as strong as the 15-foot, offshore big crankbait, big swimbait technique. So it seems very confusing, but just kind of a good sign. It's a good sign that, fish can go from really shallow to really deep quickly. And that's why you kind of need to be experimenting in all depths. So if you like to fish a lot of different stuff, this can be the most rewarding time of the year because you can go up to the bank. I remember a tournament on Chickamauga, I think 4 or 5 years ago. I was catching all mine on a spook, topwater. I was fishing a worm around some spawning fish right on the main river channel. My buddy was cranking out in 15 feet of water and he caught his biggest fish on a drop shot on the bed. So it just kind of goes to show that and I think that's been my problem over the years in May is I kind of have a certain depth range that I like to live in. And if you do that, there's just not enough fish in whatever that specific depth range you like. So I'm a big like 8 to 3 feet type of guy. The problem with doing that is that there's just not enough fish in that depth range. You really got to go out and look in that like 14 to 8 foot range. And if you're going to spend all your time in one depth range, that's the depth range to do it because that's where the fish are heading. Now, again, you might only be able to catch 3-pounders out in that depth range. Your best bites may be in shallow on the bank, those late spawners or something like that. So if I had one piece of advice for May fishing is, I've got, let's see, 13 rods and there's a shallow one. I've got like 4 or 5 that are shallow. I've got some that fish, basically all depths. Some that kind of are more that 6 foot range. But I think that is the key, is figure out the timing, figure out if there's a post-spawn window. Keep an open mind, because a lot of times when you find fish this time of year, it's because you are covering water. They're not always going to be grouped up on one little spot, and if they are, they're not those big mega schools that you typically would see 10 years ago. It's those 2, 3, 4 fish schools. You know, you have to pay attention if the shad are spawning. You're going to start seeing some bluegill activity, so we're still a little bit early for that, but you know, things like the mayfly hatch typically don't happen for another month, but you never know. Same thing with the bluegill spawn. That's typically not for about a month after the bass get done spawning, but again, you never know. And then you still have May for sure. You know, we got 72-degree water temp, we for sure still have fish that are spawning. Most are post, and then you still probably have some that aren't too far away from pre-spawn. You know, those ones that are just pulling up now to spawn. Or may spawn on the next moon. You know, those fish are still pre-spawn, so they're typically guarding a big area. I mean, if I was to guess, that fish I caught is one that's gonna spawn soon, but he's still up there just guarding a general area. That's why this swim bait, you know, I think I'm catching mostly post spawners, but every once in a while you're gonna have a fish that's staging on the same spots that you're catching post spawners, and he's gonna just swim another 100 yards up there and spawn, or he's actually in the where he's gonna spawn. You know, when you're fishing, the boat's sitting in 17 feet right now, but I'm not far away from 5 feet of water, so that very well could be a fish that is gonna spawn pretty close to where I caught him. That's what makes this bait so good, is you really can do a lot with it. For sure can catch fish in all 3 phases. Then you just got to go find the productive water. Go find the right contour change. Go find exactly what depth. You know, the funny thing is, when the swim baits really kind of started becoming popular, I'll say around 2009, everyone just thought they were big fish baits. You can for sure go out there and catch a bunch of fish on a swim bait. I mean, you can go out there and easily go out and catch 20 in a day on it. I don't know if you can catch 20 on the big 7-inch swim bait. You better really know what you're doing. But like these 6-inch, 5-inch, you can catch a ton of fish on them. And the big ones love them. And they're just a lot more efficient than all these other baits I got on my deck when it comes to throwing it up there in 5 feet of water, but then fishing it all the way out here into 15 foot. So it's a really good mid-range bait. Really good shallow, really good deep, but it seems like it's the best in this middle depth range. And like I said yesterday's video, you know, when that bait is shallow, you know, you'll see every few years, some years May is all about the deep fishing, some years it's all about the shallow fishing. So you can never really count either shallow or deep out. When I say shallow, you know, 5 feet or less, and when I say deep, like 10 feet or less, or 10 feet or more rather. But you never really know. You know, there's a lot of different factors: rain, the wind, the air temperature, the water temperature. You just never really know. Fishing pressure. There's all these different factors that are going to push fish out deep, keep them shallow. You know, if everyone comes to the lake and they all caught them the last couple of years, it was on TV that everyone was catching them offshore, and they all come to the lake right around this time and all fish offshore, you know, could keep a lot of fish shallow. You know, fishing pressure is such a big factor, probably the biggest factor. Reel it slow. It's probably, if there's one cadence, I am popping it every once in a while, fishing around a lot of grass and stuff like that, but slow rolling a swim bait. You know, it's almost like kind of like a spinner bait. You don't want it too far off the bottom, and just wind it slow. And there's times where you can speed it up to get the fish to react, but if you just really want to get the feel for this, really slow it down. And they're not always going to crush it. You know, a lot of times it's just the slightest little tick. Once you get a bite, what I typically do is I'll just turn my handle like 2 more times to where I can kind of feel the weight of the fish, and then jack them. My favorite bait, when there's just nothing that's really going to be, you know, better than anything else, no depth range, anything like that, that is for sure where you need to be fishing, and you have fish in all 3 phases. You know, it's still a little bit early for top water. A lot of those pre-spawn baits, like your square bills, your chatterbaits, your swim jig, all that, it's kind of what everyone's been doing shallow. Just really hard to beat a swim bait. Talked about this a little bit in the last few videos, but I feel like whenever a fish is going into a new area, if they're just showing up in like a pre-spawn spot, or they're just showing up to their summer place, maybe they're kind of an in-between place, they're looking for a big meal. You know, if it's a bluegill and you're down in Florida flipping a 1-ounce jig, I mean, they want 1 bluegill before they head offshore. If it's a place like here, Gunnersville, they want 1 big gizzard shad before they get offshore. 1 big meal is typically what they're looking for when they go to a new area. If you have the water clarity where they can see something like this, you know, if they don't, you know, tie you on a big spinnerbait. You'll put on a 2.5 square bill or a chatterbait with a big swim bait on the back of it or something like that. But if you really have the water clarity where they can see it, they could be in any depth range, cruising down the bank, fishing fast, moving the boat fast, turning your handle slow, giving those fish one big meal is, and you don't have much to lose. Yeah, you could go catch some big fish spawning, but typically when you have fish in all depth ranges, you're not going to be able to catch a ton of fish up on the bank spawning. Just like you're not going to come out here and catch a ton of a fish. So you really have to pick your battles, but just know like nothing, not one technique, not one depth range, not one piece of cover is really going to be on fire. Why not fish for the biggest fish on the lake? So one big meal, that's what I feel like is super important when you have fish in all three phases. A swim bait, if you have enough water clarity. And if you don't have a lot of water clarity, you can still catch them like out of brush piles. Those really high percentage small places are still going to be a great type of cover for a swim bait. So try a swim bait when you have fish in all three phases and you want to give them a big offering. You don't have anything that's really on fire. This is the best way to catch the big fish on your lake. Try that, guys. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.